In this video, I'm going to talk through some of my favorite books of 2020. So we're going to go with 10 non-fiction books and 5 fiction books / series. Let's get started. First on the list, we have A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller. Now this is a really, really good book that made me cry in lots of places, and also made me reconsider how I'm living my life. It's about this dude who is a writer, and a Hollywood film crew comes up to him one day and they want to convert his life into a film. And then in the process of him reliving kind of his life story and trying to figure out how it can become a film, he kind of realizes that the life he's been living is not particularly story-worthy. Like, there's not much of a story behind it. And he comes to this realization because he realizes that the life he's led has actually been pretty easy, and he hasn't had any particularly difficult goals that he was striving towards, and didn't need to overcome any conflict along the way to get there. Because the things that make a good story are a character that really wants something and overcomes conflict to get it. And he realized that that is also what makes a good life story. So when I read this, it was in the middle of the whole coronavirus lockdown thing in the UK. And I remember I was reading it on an evening shift at work. I was at work at the hospital until midnight. And there were like 3 hours at the end of the day after 9 p.m. where we just happened not to have any patients. So I just sat in the doctor's office and I just started reading this. And I was just completely absorbed in it, and it was so good, and I highlighted so much of it. And I really started to think that in my own life, maybe I'm living too comfortably and the things that I'm going after aren't challenging, or aren't challenging enough, or there's not enough of a struggle. And yeah, the lessons I've learned from this book, it's not like a self-helpy type book or like a personal development book. It's just like the story of this dude whose life was becoming a story. And it's like really well written and very engaging, and it's like a really good story. But it also has a lot of interesting lessons along the way. Here's a nice quote from the book. "Somehow we realize that great stories are told in conflict, but we are unwilling to embrace the potential greatness of the story we're actually in. We think God is unjust rather than a master storyteller." Next on the list, we have How to Think More About Sex by Alain de Botton. And I listened to this on Audible over the course of like 2 car journeys. And it was like really engaging, and also very entertaining and insightful in lots of different parts. And I find it hard to put this into words myself, so I'm just gonna read the excerpt, which is, "In this rigorous and supremely honest book, Alain de Botton helps us navigate the intimate and exciting, yet often confusing and difficult, experience that is sex. Few of us tend to feel we're entirely normal when it comes to sex, and what we're supposed to be feeling rarely matches up with the reality. This book argues that 21st century sex is ultimately fated to be a balancing act between love and desire, and adventure and commitment." Now, on the surface, this is a book about sex, but actually deeper, like a level deeper, it's about so much more, and it's about like the human connection, and it's about like authenticity and vulnerability and all these cool things. And honestly, I think this should be required reading for everyone. Like, this is gonna be on my list of everyone should read this book. Books that I'm compiling at some point. By the way, if you want to keep up to date with all of the books that I'm reading, you should definitely sign up to my email newsletter, which will be linked in the video description. Basically, every time I read a book in 2021, I'm going to write a quick summary of it, and I'll send out an email. So if you're interested in getting insights from books in your inbox for free, sign up to the newsletter, link in the video description. Third on the list is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And the subtitle here is Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. Now this was really interesting, because the way that he kind of explains our moral intuitions by talking about 6 different moral taste receptors. And this was really interesting because as a staunch liberal and lefty myself, I'd never quite been able to appreciate why some people are conservative / right-wing and all that kind of stuff. But the way that he talks about it, it's as if we all have these 6 different moral taste buds, and different, and sort of if you're a liberal versus if you're a conservative, or if you're somewhere along that spectrum, you respond to these different moral taste buds in different ways. And he explains that through his research and stuff, if you are, like me, a liberal, then you care very strongly about like 2 or 3 of these moral taste buds. Whereas in general, if you're a conservative, you care somewhat equally about all 6 of those. And that actually goes, like, for me, went a very long way towards explaining, like, just being able to understand more about how people on the other side of the political spectrum, how their views were shaped by what they believed was moral. Next on the list, we have The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. As you guys know, money is one of my favorite topics. And in this book, he talks about how actually the way that we as humans treat money is not very rational, and in fact, you know, based a lot on emotions and a lot on psychology. And for me, in the past, I'd always wanted to take a more kind of rational stance towards money and economics. So for example, something like, you know, paying off the mortgage on your own house is generally not rational because you could get higher returns in the stock market if you continue to have a mortgage. But as Morgan Housel argues very well in the book, it is, even though paying off your mortgage is not rational, i.e. it's not the economically rational thing to do, it is in fact very reasonable because it helps you sleep at night. And that was just like one of the sort of dozen different insights, and I'm going to be doing a separate video specifically about that book. That'll be linked up there when it's out. But it just really changed my view of money and things like saving and investing and salaries, and also stuff about like greed and ambition when it comes to money, because he tells a lot of stories of people who seemingly had loads and loads and loads of money and then threw it all away, or by doing illegal things in the pursuit of more money. And there's all these sorts of cautionary tales that I'm now starting to become a lot more interested in, because it's just so interesting. Like, this money thing is the thing that binds all of us together wherever we live. Stress about money is like one of the fundamentals of the human existence, or of the human experience, and just being able to understand a little bit more about it was, yeah, eye-opening and nice. Next, we have the book Storyworthy by Matthew Dix, which I think is probably the single best book, non-fiction book I've read all year. And as I was reading it, I was taking notes and kind of doing Kindle highlights and stuff. And I was saying to myself, damn, this is one of the best and most engaging books I've ever read. And it's a book about storytelling. It's about how to become a better storyteller. But it's a lot more than just about storytelling. And in fact, he talks about how becoming a better storyteller is actually a way of becoming a better listener, to become a better partner or spouse or brother or sister or husband or wife, like whatever. Storytelling permeates so many different aspects of our lives, and it's a skill that most of us don't bother trying to improve, or to even realize that you can improve it. And it's only really been this year that I've realized that I need to improve my own storytelling, and that I can. And this book is one of the things that's really helped in that way. There's also a really good exercise in it that he calls homework for life, which is the idea that every night you spend 5 minutes just going over your day, reflecting on your day, and writing a few words to describe the most story-worthy moment of your day. And I'd been doing this for about 3 months solidly when I read the book, and it made such a sort of tangible difference to my life. Not just in the sense that I could then tell more interesting stories because I had these written down, but actually, now that I look back through my spreadsheet on Notion where I was like tracking my story-worthy moments of each day, I can remember those few months between like May and July. I can remember those months a lot better than I can remember the last 3 months, for example, where I've not been doing it. When you do that, it's like, oh yeah, I remember that day, I remember that day, I remember that moment, that was nice. And in a way, it slows down the passage of time. Whereas for the last 3 months where I haven't been doing this homework for life and not been really reflecting on my day and writing things down, you know, if you asked me what I did last week or the week before, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I'd just be like, I don't know. The time just sort of blended into itself. I guess I was sitting at home, not going out, sitting in front of the computer making videos, but that's like about it. And so moving forward, I really want to keep on trying to do this homework for life every night, because I know it'll help me become a better storyteller and therefore a better conversationalist and therefore better social skills across the board. But more importantly, it'll help me, you know, experience life and enjoy life a little bit more fully. The final 5 non-fiction books I'm just going to blitz through because I can't be bothered to talk about them, and link in the video description. Sign up to my email newsletter. I always send emails about this stuff as I read it anyway. The first one is How to Take Smart Notes by Sonke Ahrens, which is all about how to take notes when reading, and it was really, really good, and I enjoyed it a lot. Next, we have The Ride of a Lifetime, which is the autobiography/biography of Bob Iger, who was the CEO of the Walt Disney Company for 15 years. And that was really interesting. It was all about, like, you know, his life and how he got started and how he became CEO and how he acquired like Marvel and Fox and Lucasfilm and these really interesting stories. Then there was The Elephant in the Brain, which I've done an episode of book club about. That'll be linked over there. That's all about the hidden motives in our everyday lives, and about how actually a lot of the behaviors that we have as humans are about signaling and about status and about just trying to play status games with other people. And I was definitely like, that definitely made me reflect a lot about what my own motivations were for doing things like this YouTube channel and running a business and even being a doctor and stuff. Like, to what extent is this all just signaling? Number 9, we have a book called War Doctor by David Nott, who is a vascular surgeon based in London and who has been in loads and loads of different war zones over the last like 30 years, doing like war doctory type surgeries and things. And that was so good. It's like a really engaging and thrilling story. And you hear about how his experiences of being a surgeon on the front lines, well, not quite the front lines, but a surgeon in the hospitals in places like Syria and Libya and other like war zone type places. And that was really fantastic. Recommend reading for everyone. And finally, I really enjoyed a book called Natives by Akala, which is all about like the interplay between race and class in modern day Britain. I listened to that on Audible, and it was narrated by Akala himself, and he's like a spoken word poet type guy, so he's like really good at like audio narration. So it was very engaging from that sense, but also just gave me a pretty profound insight into things like what it's like to be black in Britain, what it's like to be working class in Britain, because these are experiences that I don't have, and it really helped shape my view of the world. There's so much more to say about it, but link in the video description if you want to grab the book. So those were 10 non-fiction books. Let's now talk about my 5 favorite fiction reads of 2020. And we have to start with the series called The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, which was then finished, the final 3 books by my favorite author of all time, Brandon Sanderson. Now, the Wheel of Time series has 14 books, and I've been reading them since mid-2019. And I finished them in March 2020, April 2020, something like that. And it's really, really, really good. It's hard to describe what a like 14 book fantasy series is about, but it's sort of like these 3 boys are in some tiny ass village, and then like a wizard comes and tells them that they're like the chosen ones, and like the Dark Lord is after them and stuff, and then they like go on an adventure. And that sounds super, super lame, but it's actually so good. And I thought the last like 4 or 5 books in particular were just absolute masterpieces, and I would look forward to driving to work each day and back because I could just listen to more Wheel of Time. It was so, so good. If you're new to the fantasy genre, which is a genre that I've been sort of engaged in it since like 2017. If you're new to it, I wouldn't start with The Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time is a little bit slow and quite long, so you kind of need to be a bit more versed in fantasy and being able to sit through large amounts of description and stuff to really appreciate it. But Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, that is the series you should start with. Secondly is a 2-book series by Leigh Bardugo called 6 of Crows. Again, this is fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy. In fact, I think 4 out of the 5 books in this list are fantasy. Like, fantasy is just like the best genre. 6 of Crows. It's about this gang of thieves in like the slums of a city, and they each have their own like specialist skills. Like, one of the main characters is the boss of like this gang of thieves, and the other main character is like really like a gymnast, so she can like, you know, scale walls and sneak into places. And what's it about? They're basically trying to break in to like a super, super, super heavily guarded fortress to rescue a scientist who has discovered some like formula that creates this drug that is going to completely take over the world. And there's like a bit of magic, and there's like a bit of romance. It's got it all. And the 2 books in the series are actually like very short, and it's very sort of nicely packaged, and it ends in like a nice way. I read 6 of Crows 1 and 2 straight after finishing The Wheel of Time, when I had a hole in my heart from when The Wheel of Time finished. It temporarily plugged that hole that was left in my heart after I finished The Wheel of Time. Thirdly, we have another book by Brandon Sanderson called Elantris. This is one of his standalone novels. Again, really good. It's one of his earlier books, so it's a little bit of a slower pace than his more modern stuff to an extent, but it was also really good. And I was up until like 4 o'clock in the morning for about 3 nights in a row, just like reading it because it was sick. Oh yeah, what's it about? It's another fantasy. It's always really lame describing fantasy books, but basically there is like this city called Elantris, which 10 years ago used to be like a superpower, and they had people who could do magic and stuff. But then something dark and evil happened, and then the city became like, you know, decrepit and desolate wasteland. And it follows the story of like 3 different characters, and how, you know, one of them ends up in the city and ends up starts off as like a prince, and then ends up becoming just like a random kind of slave slash servant in the city. And the person that he's due to marry, so his fiancée, rocks up to his city and finds that he's actually dead. And it's all very complicated, but like, this sounds so lame when I say it, but trust me, it's really, really, really good. You should read Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. Next, I really enjoyed the book Normal People by Sally Rooney, which was apparently released in 2018. There was actually a TV series about it. I haven't seen the TV series, but the book was really good. And I think I read it in 1 sitting. Like, I just started reading it one evening, and I just continued to read it until like 5 in the morning. What is this book about? It follows 2 teenagers called Connell and Marianne. And Connell is like a super popular dude in high school, and Marianne is like super nerdy, unpopular in high school. And Connell and Marianne like get together, but Connell, like, because he's the popular sports guy, he doesn't tell anyone about it, and he's like mean to her and stuff. And then when they both go to university, they end up at the same university, and then Marianne becomes like popular and pretty and stuff, and then Connell struggles to fit in. And so it's like their love story, which is sort of intertwined, and there's loads of like trauma and like mental health and insecurities, and just, it's really interesting. And it was a very it was an interesting insight into the human experience in a way that I've just not quite appreciated before. So yeah, would recommend. Finally, this isn't really a book. This is actually, I think it's like an Audible original. It's like a specifically designed as an audio program. It's called The Original, and it's by Brandon Sanderson, favorite fantasy author again, and Mary Kowal. And this is just like it lasts a few hours. I think it's only like 4 or 5 hours, and it's like a book, but it's like specifically for audio. And so there's like background music and sound effects and things as the narrators are narrating it. And this isn't quite fantasy, it's more like science fiction. It's sort of set in the future in a world where, people can get cloned. And so the story goes that there is this woman who ends up murdering her husband, and then the government decides to clone the woman and gives the clone, this like artificial intelligence kind of being who's a clone of her in every way, gives her like martial arts skills and amazing like powers, and she can like kick people's asses and stuff. And her job is to track down the original, like the original person, and to kill her and then take over her life. And again, that probably sounds lame, but it's really good. I remember, so I was visiting Oxford with a friend. It was like a 3-hour drive each direction from Cambridge. 2.5 hours, something like that. And like the drive was so good because my friend was asleep and I was just listening to the original all the way there and all the way back, and it was absolutely incredible. So that would be my final recommendation, linked in the video description. So those were 10 non-fiction and 5 fiction books that I enjoyed in 2020. Again, if you like the stuff, then definitely check out my email newsletter, because every time I read a book, I email out a summary of the book and like a link to it if you want to check it out. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, you should check out this video over here, which is about the 3 books that most changed my life. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.